The Reek, an old castle audiobook, written by Jonathan Dunne, narrated for you by the author. Copyright 2025, Jonathan Dunne. Production copyright 2025, Jonathan Dunne. 1. The Reek is haunted. It was the calm before the storm. The streets of Oldcastle were abandoned, but a steady hum of banter spilled out onto Church Street from the Hound, Oldcastle's prime watering hole, where patrons supped their drinks on this dark Saturday evening in February. The pub was alive with chatter, spiked with the occasional bursts of laughter. Cyril, the old landlord, was sitting on a flattened cushion on a beer barrel inside the counter, nursing a piping hot toddy, purely for medicinal purposes, of course, and gazing through the TV high up on the far wall, while his multitasking barman took orders, poured drinks and pulled pints, and did it all with a smile on his face, thank you very much. The place was hopping, as the locals might say. Nobody took much notice of the helmeted reporters' coverage of the unending screaming atrocities around the world on the telly. But the pub fell silent when the forecast came on. Funny, war didn't faze them, but a cold front would. But then again, this was no ordinary cold front. Now that was something real, as far as the locals were concerned. Cyril shushed everyone and raised the volume with the remote control forever at his fingertips. A hush descended. The odd sepia-tinted evening sky over these last few days told them something was brewing in the north, and that uneasiness in their collective gut told them it was coming. They could feel its weight. The weatherwoman, a familiar face to every household in the country, warned of a cyclone rolling down from the North Atlantic. Everyone in the Hound watched with growing dread as the satellite image of the white swirling polar mass made its way across the Atlantic, like a child's ghostly spinning top. The weatherwoman spouted words like extratropical cyclone, large-scale low-pressure system, explosive cyclogenesis. The technical jargon went over their heads, but what hit home were her final ominous words of warning. At its current trajectory, we think the cyclone will reach land sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. People around the Dingle Peninsula should begin to see the winds pick up close to midnight. Batten down the hatches. Travel only if it's necessary, and it might be a good idea to stock up on necessities for the coming days. If this predicted snowfall freezes over, we could be stuck indoors for quite some time. It was unusual to see the familiar weatherwoman break from her script and look into the camera to speak ad-lib before bidding her audience a curt good night. An uneasiness fell over the Hound as Cyril lowered the volume on the inane advertisements. The busy barman commented, "Stock up on necessities for the coming days. Tesco's going to be mobbed tomorrow morning. If anyone can even get to the damn place. Remember COVID? Toilet paper panic buying. Toilet paper? Really? I remember using a dock leaf when I was a kid." His words were met with a light sprinkling of laughter. The drinkers weren't sure if it was a sarcastic joke or a realistically grim observation. "Old Drift is coming back to say hello, and it never leaves empty-handed." Everyone turned to the tiny and wizened old woman sitting in an armchair by the open fire, the best seating in the house, whilst nursing a warm apple cider. From a distance she looked like a scrawny black-feathered bird, possessing strong avian features and dressed in her habitual funereal garb. Nellie King, local poetess and harbinger of doom, was so old, bent and shriveled that she could have been a permanent Halloween prop in the Hound. The locals were aware of Old Drift. Not only did they know about it, the people of Oldcastle had been secretly waiting for it. They knew it was coming, even though they had tried to convince themselves Old Drift wouldn't return. Nellie King had just confirmed their suspicions. Correction, Joan the weatherwoman had just confirmed their suspicions. But there was something to Nellie King's foreboding words that only seemed to validate what the highly trained meteorologist had just confirmed. The aged crow went on. "Old Drift always comes back, and it never gives much of a warning." Her watery blue eyes stayed mesmerized on the burning logs in the fireplace. A wind had gotten up, and the drinkers listened to the rusty squeak of the Black Hound sign above the front door outside, and the crackle and hiss of the log fire.
Forget your tropical cyclones and explosive whatchamacallums. This is old drift. Oh, yes, indeedy. Make no mistake. It's coming back to remind those who may have forgotten. A gentle reminder.
Poking her right gnarled forefinger into her bony clavicle.
With his icy tentacle, and whispering a hair-raising, "Hello, my old friend. I'm back," whilst ripping off our faces with his chilled shards of sleet.
She stunned and surprised everyone with a wild cackle of laughter. Nelly's frail frame shuddered as she spilled warm spiced cider onto her skinny thighs. She watched the warm drink bloom on her wardrobe-staple black dress, but didn't seem to worry. A bigger stain was coming to town. Nelly paused and looked about the room for the first time, struggling to bring faces into focus.
"But there's something else, isn't there?"
It wasn't a question, and they bloody well knew it.
"We don't have a word for it, but we prefer the chaos the storm brings to town because it's familiar. Not like the oddity that comes in with old drift."
Heads turned to the windows flanking either side of the front door. The Reek was out there in the darkness tonight, looking down on them from its lofty reverie. It was too dark on this pitch-black evening to see the mountain through either of the windows, and the freezing fog settling on the town made sure the twin peaks of Mag Reek mountain were well hidden. The landlord wasn't having any of it. "All this hearsay, Nelly. I call it being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Coincidence. It stands to reason that people go missing up there on the Reek in the storm. Haven't you noticed that it doesn't happen at any other time of the year? Old drift has a habit of sneaking up on you." One of the drinkers at the Hound that night stood alone at the counter, dressed in khakis, with a fresh pint of Guinness before him and a docile German shepherd curled at his feet. He kept to himself, quietly taking in the conversation while his eyes lingered on the stout. The new barman had done it justice. It was a perfect pour, almost too fine to spoil with a sip. He found himself nodding along with every word from Cyril's lips. As far as he was concerned, there was only one oddity in Oldcastle, the wrinkled old crow by the fire. Still, she was harmless, a free spirit, and he could respect that. He didn't put any stock in her hocus-pocus. If anyone knew the truth of things, it was him. The landlord went on. "Up there on the Reek you have a sudden whiteout, and all that's visible is snow on every side of you. And it looks all the same, north, south, east and west. Nothing but a blanket of snow from the ground to the sky, because up there it's difficult to know where the snow ends and the clouds begin. Any amateur wouldn't know her arse from her elbow in those conditions." Now, Cyril," a female drinker piped up. "Don't be sexist. Men have arses and elbows too." This comment was met by a round of welcome chuckles to lighten the gloomy atmosphere that had settled in the Hound like dust. Even Cyril couldn't keep the smirk from his ruddy complexion. "Nelly, do us all a favour. Leave the conspiracy theories to the conspiracy theorists, who find oddities about every goddamn thing that moves. Tourists don't know the Reek like we do, how it can love you and leave you with equal measure." "It's not only tourists who go missing up there." Everyone turned to the woman at the table by the left window near the door, seated beside a younger woman with a head full of dreadlocks and who looked unmistakably like her. It was Wilma, owner of Wilma's Cafe down the street in the town square, sitting with her daughter, daintily sipping a glass of red wine. She'd been unusually quiet until now, but she was about to make up for it, and in spectacular fashion. "The last time old Drift came to town," Wilma announced, "Kira McCarthy never came home. That was 23 years ago, if memory serves me correctly." Someone added, "And 'twas this very month." Wilma continued, "I can still see her sitting at one of my tables with her mother, poor old Mary Mac. She was never the same after her daughter left her. She kind of faded away after that." The cafe owner shook her head and blinked, perplexed by what had happened all those years ago. No sooner had Wilma uttered these words than heads turned toward the man with the dog. It was clear to everyone that Wilma wasn't aware that missing Ciara's husband-to-be was right here tonight, over on the other side of the pub, and keeping to himself as was his custom. It wasn't until Wilma noticed the room go silent and people suddenly finding the floor or ceiling utterly fascinating that she realized she'd just stomped into it with her big mouth and her even bigger moccasin boots. Christ, would she ever learn? One might think that years of steering the busiest cafe restaurant in Oldcastle would have taught her a thing or two about timing. Turning brick red, Wilma announced, I'm sorry, Gary. I wasn't thinking. She knew she was being slightly disingenuous. She was thinking perfectly clear, but wasn't aware Gary Gillespie was in the public house. Nothing new there, Mum, her daughter added with a stern scowl. By the looks of things, it wasn't the first time Mummy spoke out of turn. Gary looked up from his pint of Guinness and gestured that there was no harm done with a dismissing wave of his hand. That was a long time ago, Wilma. He reached for his dog Spike and gently ran his ears through his hands, looking for comfort on a subconscious level. Many years had passed, but what happened still cut deep and would take the rest of his life to heal. Only death's suture could bring final healing. Wilma was on the verge of saying something else to Gary, but instead she made to vacate the hound. For a second, it looked as if her daughter was going to accompany her, but she defiantly sat down. She tried to grab her mother, but Wilma wasn't having any of it. Cyril cried out, "Wilma, you've left a full glass of Rioja behind you." Everyone knew it wasn't Rioja wine. It was some cheap cooking wine that came in a brick carton. The hound wasn't the kind of place for wine connoisseurs, and Rioja was a place in a faraway country. "Wilma," Gary called after her. "Don't be silly. That's all in the past now." "And it haunts you every day, Gars." As Wilma left through the front door, an icy draught crept in around the pub, a sombre reminder. "I'm sorry, Gary. Call in for coffee and dessert, on the house." "I might take you up on that," Gary answered with a sparkling grin. "I'm partial to your strawberry cheesecake." This throwaway comment drew laughs from the drinkers, not knowing that Gary would never have the opportunity to sample another spoonful of Wilma's famed cheesecake. After Wilma left, her daughter came to her mother's defence. "She was close with the McCarthys. It just hit her all at once, I think. Grief's like that. It sneaks up on you." Gary nodded solemnly. They all knew what it was, that thing that sneaks up on you.
"The Reek is haunted,"
announced Nellie King. She nodded to a dusty black and white framed photograph above the fireplace of a smiling individual sitting on a grass tussock.
"And it all started with him."
She pointed a shaking, knobbly forefinger.
"Johnny the Reek."
"Nellie, if—"
"No, Cyril. I know what you're going to say, but you're not going to convince me otherwise. Johnny the Reek was the prototype."
"A prototype? Come on, Nellie, with your fancy words."
"Well, I'll put it to you this way. He was a first in a string of disappearances. Johnny the Reek was the first documented. Only God knows if others went missing before him. All those missing souls are haunting that mountain."
A void of silence loomed in the hound. People turned to Gary to see his reaction, but the man remained stone-faced. In reality, the woman's words hooked into Gillespie's insides, twisting with quiet, awful certainty. But he refused to let it get the better of him. Gary felt the weight of many eyes on him just then, but the notion of all those souls floating aimlessly around the peaks and the cold darkness, his Ciara amongst them, gave him the shivers and sent the hair standing on the nape of his neck. He felt the pinch of resentment. The old woman's words annoyed him, and he wondered if Nellie wasn't trying to stoke some kind of reaction from him. And that was the prod he needed to jump in, considering that he now held the same job position Johnny the Reek held a century before him. "But Johnny the Reek didn't go missing, Nellie. What happened to that poor devil has been well documented. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. As Cyril pointed out, all of this has been documented." Nellie answered defiantly.
"I'm not disputing that fact. But did he return?"
"No," answered Gary. "He died on the mountain."
So they found him.
Gary had a sneaking suspicion the local poetess was leading him down the garden path, and that was the last place he wanted to be tonight. Well, no.
Then where is he?
She asked.
Is he at the top of Churchtown Road?
She was referring to the cemetery, but Gary didn't follow. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. You know he's not. They never found the body. And now he knew where she was leading him. Nellie, I know where you're going with this, and I don't like what's at the end of the garden path. He couldn't get the image of what was left of his bride-to-be hovering around the mountain top, wailing like a banshee and looking for her way home. But that was cloud talk. Gary Gillespie had seen too much in life to believe in life after death.
So, tell me, Gary,
Nellie King went on.
You know the mountain better than anyone here. Why has a body never been retrieved?
She paused.
There's an eerie connection between that mountain and Old Drift. Mag Reek is terribly haunted. Old Drift confuses and lures, then offers them up to the mountain.
Nellie, cried Cyril, looking as if he was about to have a heart attack. Keep that old trap of yours shut, or you'll scare them all home. Enough mumbo-jumbo. It almost sounded funny, but the atmosphere had soured in the Hound. From behind the counter, propped up on his beer barrel pulpit, the landlord sermonized. With all due respect, and I respect my elders. Cyril's remark was met with a few titters, considering that he wasn't much younger than old Nellie. It's all BS. That means bullshit. He winked to the lady sitting in front of him. I've spent many an hour up on the mountain as a young man, younger than I am now, and I can tell you that there's nothing up there moving around but your own shadow. The mind plays tricks. He turned to Gary Gillespie. Gary, what say you? Gary Gillespie took a gulp of the creamy Guinness while putting some thought into the question. The silence is haunting. Silence can get to a person. There's a stillness on the peaks that can't be found anywhere else. Humans are social creatures. After a while, people don't like the silence. It puts them on edge. That's when they start filling in the void with their own overactive imaginations and talking to themselves for company. And before they know it, they're not alone on the mountain. A lucid rush of memories came at Gary, every one of them with Kira. Once upon a time, the Reek was their home away from home. How many times had they gone up there to look down on the town and see how small Old Castle really was? Yet it was the whole world for them when they were down there. The drinkers turned to the windows as the first flurry of snow came in silence, landing softly on the window panes. Nellie King cleared her throat, then crooned a poem as she stared into the embers.
They say the mountain stands alone. No kin, no name, no skin nor bone. Its shadow falls where none dare tread. Its rocks and stones remember the dead. So drink your fire and shut your eyes. Forget the wind, forget the cries. But mark my words, if you should roam, the mighty Reek is not alone.